But I'm going to give you but I'm going to tell you a story about a time when I almost quit college because I was lacking the requisite background knowledge for the class I was taking. Hi, I am Gail, Miss Green to my students. I say this all the time, but what students? Well, I studied speech pathology and then I switched from speech pathology after I got my bachelor's degree to study literacy. I became a teacher in the South Bronx, and after the pandemic, I decided that I would leave that teaching job, and so I've been working on my document preparation business. I did not quit teaching, as many persons tend to ask me. I can't quit teaching. I am a teacher at heart. I've always been a teacher. I only realized it in my later years, but I have always been a teacher. I cannot quit teaching. I will never quit teaching, and I'm literally teaching right now as I'm about to teach you in this next video. Now, in this video, I am talking about, first I'm going to talk about background knowledge, and then I'm going to make another video wearing the same outfit. It's called Batching Content. If you never heard of it, look it up. And I'm going to talk about blends. I really want to talk about background knowledge because, again, in addition to a lot of talk in the press about the science of reading and the move towards it, a little late, I think, but they say better late than never. So we're talking about the science of reading. Along with all the talk about the science of reading is background knowledge. And I've heard or read in the press about teaching background knowledge. I'm not sure what that looks like. I'd like to understand how that works. For me, background knowledge is knowledge you have already acquired that you bring to the classroom, you bring to bear on some topic that you're learning. In my previous video where I talked about intelligences, you can find it on YouTube, I talked about figuring out your strengths and by figuring out what your intelligences are. And in that video, I talked about discovering who you are requires you to get out more, see more, explore more, be exposed to different things. The same thing goes for background knowledge. Now, when parents send their kids to school, especially Caribbean parents, and I won't include South American parents because I don't know anything about them, but I know from being a teacher that a lot of parents in minority communities expect the teacher to do the teacher's job and the parents to do the parents' job. And we have had many workshops at school where we brought parents in and we gave them strategies that they can use to help their students. Me personally, as a teacher, I always send a packet home at the beginning of the school year to let parents know what I'll be doing and telling them how they can help. So I do all of this stuff to include parents into the learning. But another thing that parents can do to help their kids learn better in school is help them acquire knowledge of many things. The knowledge needs to be wide and varied because students are learning many things in the classroom. And it's not just the topics of math and science and social studies. It is what we learn in math, what we learn in science, the text we are reading. We are reading about something that happened in the country of Ireland. Students might not know what that is or have a reference for it. I remember when I was in college, and we had a new student come to the class, and he introduced himself and he said, "I'm from Ghana." There were some students in my class who did not know Ghana, but because they're from the Caribbean, they thought he said Guyana. And when he was talking, as he spoke, what he was saying was probably not making sense because he was speaking in the context of being from an African country, but persons were interpreting it in the context of being a country in the Caribbean. And so it was a little confusing. This is why background knowledge is important. If my classmate had had a knowledge of the country Ghana, had heard of it before in West Africa, then they would have been able to understand what he was saying better. I had a friend who had actually won a trip with UNESCO to go to Ghana, so I was familiar with it. But as I have said before, I used to geek out on the atlas. So I used to look through all the countries in the world. So I knew of Ghana. But I'm going to tell you a story about a time when I almost quit college because I was lacking the requisite background knowledge for the class I was taking. I'm being dramatic. It's the class I dropped. I did not almost quit college. There was no way I was going to quit college. So I was taking hearing science, or was it audiology? I was taking audiology, and hearing science are more physics based. The other subjects that I learned in speech pathology had to do with letters and sounds, and I mastered those because I love letters and sounds, but I did not love science. And so we were studying hearing science and audiology, which was even harder than hearing science. You know, they're talking about frequencies and megahertz and hertz, and they were hitting on math and science, and I was like, I am lost. And so I was working a full-time job, and I used to go to school at night. So I used to have class from 6 to 9. And I got off work. I was so tired. I usually have a very full day at work because my job was very busy. I was working at the Jamaican consulate in New York, the busiest consulate, I'm going to say, in the entire world, because there's a lot of Jamaicans in New York. I ran from work at 5 and I ran to the train, and I mean literally run. I run to the train and then I get off the train and I run down, the street because the bus stop was so far from the school. And then I had to run. When you're on college campuses, the campuses are so big. I was tired every day, but this day probably was the first time I actually, nodded off in school. The teacher was teaching about tuning forks and frequencies. And if you've never heard the word tuning forks before, that was me in the classroom. I was drawing a blank. Nothing he was saying was making sense because I did not know. I had no background knowledge, no index card, no context, no reference for the words tuning fork. I know fork, so I had a mental picture of something with teeth, but I did not know what a tuning fork was. And for me, I like to get a mental picture when I'm learning. This makes me understand easier, and it goes to my long-term memory a lot faster. I don't memorize. I need to understand. And then I never forget it. So I'm sitting there, I'm nodding off, he's talking about, and I think he thought that he was boring me. And he's saying tuning fork, but I'm still struggling to understand. So I was sitting there like, and then I raised my hand. I was like, sir, are the tuning forks the same size? And he said to me, why would they be the same size? When I tell you, I was embarrassed. I was a grown woman because I went to college, in the 2000, and I started college in 2009, I think, or so. So I was a grown woman, and this professor was younger than I am, and he yelled at me, and I was so embarrassed. He was an audiologist, so not so much a professor as someone hired to teach the class, because none of my other professors have ever yelled at me like that. He said, why would it be the same size? I don't know what a tuning fork is. And then fast forward some time later, and I think I was working with this family, or I was filling in for my friend whose mother was away sick, and I was babysitting again. I was looking after 3 kids after school, and they had a piano, and the piano teacher came over, and I believe I saw him use a tuning fork, but it was afterwards. That would have helped me when I was in school. Why he had it, I don't know, because he was a piano teacher. I don't know. But another time, I was watching, Angie's List, where she talks about the different jobs that you can find, the different practitioners, I'm going to say, that you can find on her website. And so in the ad, it said, if you're looking for, a mechanic or a duct cleaner or a piano tuner, and then the piano tuner hold up the tuning forks like this, and I had the biggest aha moment. I wish I could find that video. I wanted to thank that man because in that moment, I was like, oh my God, that's what a tuning fork is. Actually, the Angie's List probably came before the babysitter. I don't remember which one. But it was the man in the Angie's List ad that held a tuning fork like this that made me know what a tuning fork was. Because when I went to I dropped the hearing science class, and I dropped it that semester, and I took it with a different professor. In the next semester, the professor was so mad at me. I asked him for a recommendation, and he was like, no, you dropped my class. But anyway, he was mad. But me being in that classroom and him talking about tuning fork this and tuning fork that, and the frequency and the sound, none of it made sense because I did not know what a tuning fork was, and I was a grown woman. When I saw that tuning fork in the Angie's List ad, I had that big aha moment. But it came several, probably years too late. But this is my point. My point is that without exposure to many different things, we don't have the requisite background knowledge, the context, the frame of reference to understand a lot of things we're taught. I've taught many things to my students, and I've had to teach the background information, and I guess this is what they mean by teaching background knowledge. I've had to teach the background information for them to understand it. My students, I used to teach the struggling reader, so this would be me at my little table, and my 2 to 5 students would be around my table. These are the students who needed extra help in reading because I was a reading interventionist. And so they'd be sitting in front of me, and so I had a little more time to, fine tune it for them. So we were reading a text and it was talking about timber. And timber was relevant to understanding the story. It was about being in the woods and cutting down trees for timber. And they needed to understand the context of timber to understand the story. And so my students did not understand timber. So I had to use, my student was wearing a shoe, a Timberland shoe. One thing about me, I am going to use every little thing that I know about my students and everything I know to teach my students. And I'm glad I've collected a whole bunch of useful and maybe useless information over the years because they turn out to be useful. Now, this is one example of where I would just use something my students are familiar with to teach them what I'm trying to teach, to help them acquire what I'm teaching. And this is what teachers do when they're differentiating and what you call being with it or being a responsive teacher. When I taught, I would use Roblox and Among Us and whatever it is to help my students understand. So we were doing the word about timber, and I said, hold up your shoe. Whatever his name was, I won't say his name, but I said, hold up your shoe. And I said, look on your shoe. Why do you think your shoe is called Timberland? And I said, look at the logo. It is actually a tree. Timber, the wood that comes from trees, and that is why it's called Timberland, because it's almost like, I think it was one tree or maybe 2 trees, I forgot now, but it was like in a forest. So it was kind of helping them realize what timber was. And he was like, oh, Timberland, my shoe. He did not get it. But I was glad I had that. It like when I'm teaching, I have to be like this to figure out another way to convey the message. So with him, my students now looking at his shoe and seeing the tree and the timberland, he was now able to make an association between that and the word timber, and now the story talking about trees being cut down for timber and depleting the environment and whatever it is. This is part of what students need, and they get this by a lot of exposure. Teachers can't give all of this. Teachers can't teach it all the time while they're teaching. They have to give it to the students who grasp it and then probably come back to the students who don't, if they have intervention teachers like myself. Parents have to play their part by having their kids be exposed to a lot of different things, not the negative stuff that a lot of kids get exposed to, but a lot of positive stuff that they can learn from. So you go for a walk in the forest. You say they cut down trees to make, houses, and they use them to make paper, and they use them to make many things. And you have a discussion. You are walking in a forest. You can talk about so many different things. You're watching your child play their favorite video game, and it's set in another country, and you're asking them what country is that and what they know about that country. And there's so many little ways to help kids get background knowledge. And one day I'm going to talk about how going to the supermarket is with your child and discussing the measurements and the weights in the store is an amazing part of them learning, or an amazing experience for them to have to help them learn measurements and data in math. Because according to MAP, when I was a teacher, measurement and data was the one topic that students fail most at. That and geometry. They fail at geometry most because geometry was a little above their grade level, and they fail at measurement and data, which I find very shocking because every can of soda, every bottle of water has measurement on it. Every toothpaste tube, every bag of rice, everything. Anyway, let me get off of my soapbox. So that is it about background knowledge. And if I remember something else, I will come back to it. I am Gail, Miss Green to my students, and I thank you for watching.